Hello, Saints. We're going to speak a little more on the Adventist Heritage Tour I was on up in to Maine and New Hampshire, Vermont, upper New York, down in Boston, New Bedford, Fairhaven. And we were at Joseph Bates' house on Tuesday, and there we saw his home, and you can see it here. And it was always touted as his boyhood home because he wasn't born there. He was born in Rochester, not Rochester, New York, but Rochester, Massachusetts. And there was a young family who moved to the poor city of Fairhaven on the other side of New Bedford. Now, they had been the same name, but because of the Revolutionary War, the two areas split. One was more, New Bedford was more for the British, Fairhaven was more for independence. And so they split at that time. He was out of this home that you see here that Bates left at the age of 15 to be a cabin boy. The house was very near the lake. In fact, all the buildup around the area is kind of hard to see the ocean, but he had a clear view of it from his bedroom, and he could see the ships coming in and dreaming about being on the sea, uh, not as a cabin boy, but maybe as a captain. And so this is a very important part, and I always thought that this was his boyhood home, that as he grew up he left. But no, he stayed there for many years. In fact, he was a sea captain and still living at that house, at that property, when he accepted Christianity and was converted, when he joined the Christian Connection Church, when he accepted the Millerite message and all that. He was still there at that house. And so the house has a little more of an importance to our message, our story of Bates, not just looking at a place where he was born, but where so much of his life, especially the beginnings of it, took place. He served as a captain of his own ship between about 1820, beginning about 1821. 2021, the year after he gave up smoking, chewing tobacco, using profane language. Later, he quit tea and coffee. By 43, he became a vegetarian. He was all into these reformed movements, anti-slavery, anti-drinking, until he found the greatest reform movement of all, the Millerite movement in Adventism. And so, by the time he retired in 27, he had a small fortune of $11,000, they say, and try to convert that what that would be today. That's quite a tidy sum. And he retired at the age of 35 and became associated with those various reforms that I spoke about. Mainly, he was in the early temperance, right? It's almost the very beginning of temperance movements, and of course, anti-slavery. But he accepted the Advent message, the Second Advent, preaching of William Miller in 39, and began to preach it himself, be involved with it. Now, Josiah Litch, Joshua V. Himes was a friend of his from Fairhaven who had moved up to Boston and had the Chardon Street Chapel and worked with William Lloyd Garrison and anti-slavery and whatnot. And when William came to town, he invited him several times before he finally came. William Miller preached at the chapel, and Himes became his big promoter and would promote the message. Another one they believe was a friend of his was T.M. Preble, who was also a kind of an itinerant preacher, just like Frederick Wheeler was. He was of the Free Will Baptist, and he got the message too, and he accepted the Sabbath. He wrote an article that was published near Washington, New Hampshire, and he then had from that article produced a little pamphlet which came into the hands of Joseph Bates. Bates, of course, we know, walked up there, had a long night meeting with Frederick Wheeler, and then went over to the Farnsworth house in the morning, and then came back home. On his way back across the bridge, he was asked, "What's the good news?" And he replied, "The news is the seventh day is the Sabbath." Well, crossing that bridge that you see the embankment here, this is the bridge that's no longer there, but crossed over from Fairhaven to New Bedford. Sometime later, that James and Ellen would accept the message, about the same time or just after the time that they were married there in August of 46. And so we see these beginnings of what would be the Sabbatarian Adventists, or would later become the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we refer to as the little flock. And out of this movement came a force or a movement to give that last message. And so really we see the importance of the Millerite movement, more so than the judgment itself, but the precursor to the coming of Christ, as that is the message of the gospel, the last time, the last push of the gospel, the last message of hope that goes out into the world. Now, as important as this judgment is, because we see this as the great Yom Kippur, the great day of judgment, the idea of judgment should be carried with it the idea of justice. When man sinned, God let Satan have control of the world so the universe could see what the results of sin were. And with that, at one point in this whole salvation history process, God's going to have to come in and take the world back. And that's what we see in the first angel's message, where the angels crying with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come." God has stepped upon the stage of action to take back the world. He stepped upon the stage of action to restore justice in a world with very little, if any, justice. And so now we're beginning to see the kingdom being restored back to God. And in there we see Satan's kingdom being eclipsed, hence the message that Babylon has fallen, showing that God's kingdom is triumphant. And so this is real life people coming together with the real life message. And that message is couched in our three angels' messages. And why we're here today as Seventh-day Adventists, giving this message. We're not just another denomination who goes to church on Saturday and that's it. We were raised up for this particular message. Joseph Bates played a very important part in that. And hope you can join him, feel connected to him, to give this last day message as we prepare to go home. Blessings.